Re 0, Arc 8, Chapter 60, Palladio Manesque.
Palladio Manesque, one of the princes who had competed with the 77th emperor of the Wallachian Empire, Vincent Wallachia, in the imperial selection ceremony. In the 77th imperial selection ceremony, which was one of even fiercer competition compared to past selections, he had allied himself with the deemed forerunner Lamia Godwin, and had nearly cornered Vincent Abellux, who at the time had not yet assumed the throne, as well as Prisca Benedict. Ultimately, Palladio's abilities were considered to be a threat, and having been impeded by the colluding Vincent and Prisca, he was forced to withdraw from the imperial selection ceremony. However, Palladio himself was not at fault for his own defeat. It was the fact that Lamia, with whom he had formed an alliance, had been taken down prematurely, that resulted in a fatal alteration in the course of the imperial selection ceremony unbeknownst to Palladio and led to his defeat. Palladio, truly, was she not just a hopeless younger sister solely proficient at lip service, having already lost her existence, in a way that proved that she was all bark and no bite, was Lamia. When Lamia had attacked the dragon carriages as they fled from the imperial capital, Palladio had also lent his eyes upon her request. And yet, Lamia had lost pitifully and met her demise. Both in life and in death, she was nothing more than a foolish sister who left behind no accomplishments worthy of her grandiose words. Sneering at Lamia's disgraceful behavior, Palladio, with gold pupils that bore witness to his undead nature including the third eye on his forehead, he narrowed his three eyes and fixed his gaze upon the battlefield. On the battlefield before him, an immense number of undead marched forward in ranks, armed with immortality and a deep-rooted obsession to capture the city that was their target, relentlessly continuing their resolute and repulsive attacks, commanding the undead that blanketed these vast lands, and capturing the city in question, the fortified city of Garkla, and thus destroying once and for all the Wallachian Empire that had been misguided to this day. That was Palladio's duty. That was the duty bestowed upon Palladio as one chosen by the heavens. Palladio was a descendant of the Evil Eye tribe, a race blessed by the world. In ancient times, the Evil Eye tribe was said to have guided the mediocre human race with their special powers, and the divine protection, which was a gift usually granted to a select few, was bestowed upon every descendant of their entire race, one favored by the heavens. However, the Evil Eye tribe was feared by the people for their superior powers, and was also an unfortunate race that had been driven out from the center stage of history. Palladio had a mission to save his fellow tribesmen who had fallen into a world of suffering. He must prove it. That the Evil Eye tribe was the most preeminent race in the world. For that very reason, Palladio, this empire built by cowards such as you two, I shall destroy and rebuild it. Running his fingers through his undulating green hair, within the mind of Palladio, whose undead visage had distorted, were the aggravating images of both Vincent and Prisca. Having violated the unwritten rule of the imperial selection ceremony that only a single individual was permitted to survive, towards the ignoble nature of the two who had colluded together to survive, as a member of that same Wallachian imperial family, he held nothing but contempt. At this rate, it would not be surprising that, even during the imperial selection ceremony, there had been dastardly attempts made to trample upon the long history of the Wallachian Empire and its weight. No, rather, it would have been only natural to assume that some kind of conspiracy was at play. Palladio, if not for that, for what reason would I have fallen behind the likes of you and your ilk? Being a descendant of the Evil Eye tribe, chosen by the heavens, utilizing that extraordinary talent, Palladio had swept aside all of his enemies and established his position as a prince of Wallachia. He, who upheld the empire's law of iron and blood above all else, could never have been inferior to weaklings who only engaged in collusion and schemes. Therefore, Palladio, Vincent and Prisca, I shall sentence the both of you, and thus, once the Wallachian Empire was flattened into its ideal form, it would be governed by Palladio, who possessed the lineage and qualities befitting its ruler. As for the manner of his rule, it would be modeled after the one Palladio had long regarded as the greatest emperor of all time, the one who ruled the Wallachian Empire with pain and fear, the emperor of the Briar. He would follow the example of Ugod Wallachia, making the authority of the emperor known far and wide. The regency of Ugod, who was said to have bound the hearts of his own people with thorns, was precisely Palladio's ideal. In later works of fiction, there were accounts of foolish rumors concerning the Emperor of the Briar living for the love of a mere village girl. Upon Palladio's ascension to the throne, all of those would be incinerated and buried. The basis for Palladio's confidence, of course, was the ability bestowed upon Palladio as a member of the Evil Eye tribe that formed the core of his unique nature, an extraordinary power. Palladio, closing both of his eyes, he focused his attention to the third eye that rested upon his forehead, his evil eye. Instantly, Palladio's field of vision was no longer simply a narrow view of the battlefield before him, but a vast, heavenly gaze that grasped the expansive space of the surrounding area in its entirety. It was truly the viewpoint of the sun. Palladio's third eye integrated his own field of vision with that of the sun, providing the perspective of a ruler looking down upon the world at large. Making use of this, Palladio fulfilled his role as commander of the undead army with dignity. For ordinary individuals, one might boast that they could win by brute force with the inexhaustible forces of the undead, but employing such poor tactics to force one's way through would not be a battle befitting an emperor. Bringing the opponent to their knees by means of both force and ingenuity, such was the true embodiment of the law of iron and blood of Wallachia. Palladio, you have prepared suitable experts and have made ample provisions. And it is apparent that you happen to be blessed with subordinates. But in the end, it seems like that is your limit, Vincent. The coordinated attack between the soldiers stationed on the walls and the powerful troops that charged forth was impressive, and the undead, despite their superior numbers, were unable to breach even the first layer of fortified cities' defenses. However, the fact that they were using some of the highest quality cards in their hands so early was naught but a sign of insecurity concerning their fighting strength. After all, Palladio's evil eye could see through to the city's interior. Most of the occupants were refugees who had fled from the imperial capital and various towns and villages, and without having the power to fight, they were simply a hindrance. From their standpoint, defending the thickest and largest walls was the only thread onto which they could cling. Palladio, I shall teach those ignorant fools who do not realize that this is naught but a fragile and fleeting illusion. You people, the world which you see through your two eyes is so narrow that I cannot help but pity you. Scoffing at such a foolish resistance, Palladio held up his hand and projected his voice to a distant location. This, also, was an innate power of Palladio as a member of the Evil Eye tribe, telepathic communication, which allowed him to project his voice to any person whose hair, nails, or body parts he had taken, regardless of the distance that separated them. With that, Palladio made the decisive move that would end the fortified city. That being, Palladio, the undead flying dragons are to be deployed at once. To those fools who focus all of their efforts upon the city walls, we shall teach the methods by which a true emperor wages war. The enemy's flying dragon squadron has crossed the great mountain behind the grand fortress and entered the sky above. Right now, the enemy soldiers are being dropped in and the undead have invaded the city. The messenger who came racing into the command room reported the change of situation between pants and breaths. The walled fortress had been suffering from simple yet powerful brute force attacks, but now the opponent had decided to attack from the air, the largest weak point in Gartla. Gouged out of a mighty mountainside, the city's greatest fortress could be boasted to have a robustness that would not easily be defeated even if the ramparts surrounding the city were breached. However, the sky was the one place where it was defenseless. Serena, just when the situation has become worrying, you make your move. This tactic, as I assumed, is probably directed by His Excellency Palladio Manesque. Otto, the Prince of Wallachia, who competed with His Excellency the Emperor in the imperial selection ceremony, Otto muttered to Serena, who frowned at the report and traced the white sword wound on her face with her finger. Among the opponents who had joined the undead side, he was named as a target to be wary of in advance. He was a rare person with a unique ability that came from the Evil Eye tribe, and his nature was both sadistic and ruthless. It would not be easy to handle an opponent who concentrated all of their strength into one's defenseless blind spot, but it was a common war strategy. Especially in siege warfare, a small hole could often bring about destruction. On such a large scale, it would have been fatal to have such a hole created. Therefore, Otto, just as you expected. Theory, Serena, Otto, never mind, no need to worry about it. More importantly, Serena tilted her head at the unfamiliar sound, waved her hand lightly, and then Otto gave a nod of approval to Bastet's in the center of the room to send instructions to the messenger. In response, Bastet's thread-like eyes slightly opened. Bastet's, give them the order. It is time for the special forces. Yes, he was able to use words that were not familiar to him in an appropriate manner. That ought to have been an arrow fired as the decisive blow in the battle for the fortified city of Garkla. The utility of flying dragon riders was common knowledge that went without saying for the people of the Empire, but when applying the condition of them being undead, it was something that could only be accomplished provided that both rider and flying dragon were resurrected. Fulfilling that prerequisite, the undead flying dragon riders contributing to the undead forces were few in number. Therefore, they had been handled carefully, naught else but upon the scene where their involvement would be critical to the utmost. Palladio, the undead flying dragons are to be deployed at once. To those fools who focus all of their efforts upon the city walls, we shall teach the methods by which a true emperor wages war. From the officer commanding the hosts of undead, an order was sent out telepathically, obeying the strange voice that seemed to echo directly within their heads. The few undead flying dragon riders took their undead flying dragons along with them, and seized the skies of the fortified city upon the flaps of their beloved dragon's wings. Towering over the rear of the fortified city, surmounting the height of the great mountain which served as the national border with the neighboring countries, was a life-threatening act, no matter how skilled of flying dragon riders they were. Disregarding that greatest obstacle of risking their lives, the undead flying dragon riders accomplished the objective of their operation. Undead flying dragon riders, below the golden glow of their undead eyes, the great fortress, protected by a robust wall built of stone, could be seen. Deployed there was a dragon ship carried by nearly 100 undead flying dragons, and the unruly group of undead boarded upon it. The ones in charge of transport were undead, and thus the ones being sent in were also undead. It was a blasphemous tactic, one that cared naught for survival. Go. Receiving that brief command, the neighing undead flying dragons dropped the dragon ship upon that place. It was an act of barbarity that accounted not for their speed or position of landing, one that would be more appropriately titled as being cast off. In order to deliver a fatal blow to the Wallachian Empire, it spun and spun as it approached the city center, and then, in our capacities, we are the, strongest. The group that had jumped out like a tempest from the mountainside stormed the flank of the plummeting dragon ship, and from the inside out, pulverized what was to be the fatal blow upon the Imperial soldiers to smithereens. Appointed as the special forces, the time that they spent waiting was tantalizing, despite the heavy responsibility. However, even though it was tantalizing, there was no fear that their efforts would amount only to a swing and a miss. That was because Natsuki Schwartz was a man who had already won over the trust of Gustav Morello, unconditionally assisting in the things that he had decided, believing in the events that he was convinced would occur without any basis. Gustav had resolved himself to fight, to the best of his ability, against any enemy whom he had declared they would oppose. Therefore, ever since the battle surrounding the fortified city had commenced, as they felt the fierce fighting of the members of the Pleiades battalion aside from themselves unfolding, they patiently awaited their time. But then again, the act of waiting, and being unbothered by waiting, were entirely different matters. With a powerful bellow, Gustav swung about his 4 arms, and rampaged as he pleased atop the plummeting dragon ship. The undead on board the dragon ship had thrust their weapons into the vessel, securing their bodies in place so as to not be thrown off. Because of that, their response to the surprise attack of Gustav's squad had been delayed. Comprising the special forces together with Gustav were not Schwartz's personal guards of Hyan, Whites, and Idra, but rather the veteran gladiators who had spent a long time on the gladiator island. That was to say, they were individuals with whom Gustav was well acquainted. As governor of Jinnenhive, it was Gustav's duty to administer the gladiator island without a hitch, and he had a better grasp of the gladiators' abilities than they themselves did, though he had never imagined that this kind of service would fall under his duties as governor. Gladiator, to think they'd send rabbits in order to kill wolves. Gladiator, we're the wind, and yet nobody can fucking surround the wind. Gladiator, kuahahaha. It's a a brawl's surely brewin' I tell ya. Stakin' my life really gets me fucking goin'. Hot-headed, yet capable individuals such as the lone wolf Jawsra, Finmel, and Milzak wielded their weapons together with Gustav upon the dragon ship, and subjugated the undead one after another. The mysterious phenomenon of the raised fighting spirit surrounding the Pleiades battalion allowed the gladiators versed in battle to be deployed against powerful fighters with many years of military experience, and to sufficiently display their strength even in the poor situation of a plummeting dragon ship. Nay, it was rather the situation upon which their lives were staked, which had allowed them to display abilities that exceeded even their true strength. Gustav, that is precisely why selecting a suicide squad. No, why selecting the special forces is effective. On this battlefield, the duty of Gustav's squad had an equal, if not greater, danger to their lives than those holding back the swarms of undead on the front lines. They were entrusted with such an important task. However, it was imperative that Gustav's squad did not die, to have not even a single one of them die. Such was the strict order imposed on them by the boss of the Pleiades battalion. Gustav, as the official, I do not deem it acceptable to serve two masters. Therefore, I do not look up to you as my master, but the earnest request of a friend is something I wish to undertake to the best of my capacity. Saying that, Gustav grabbed the heads of the undead who had pulled out their weapons and were moving to counterattack, and smashed the four bodies together above his head, shattering them, scattering their earthen remains as their crumbling resounded. He immediately seized the next enemies. Gustav despised the violent and savage temperament of the multi-armed tribe so very much as he could, he regulated his own heart, and, not wanting to surrender himself to belligerence or anger, he had intended on living a life with firm restrictions upon himself. In this Wallachian Empire, while serving as governor of the Gladiator Island, he had maintained his principles. Gustav, those principles of his. In this moment, Gustav completely forgot about them all. In this moment, he rampaged with the same temperament of the multi-armed tribe he thought to be vexing. For that reason, Gustav, in our capacities, we are Special Forces, Invincible. 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 Gustav and the rest of the Special Forces carried out their vital directive. After all, it was precisely that uproar of ardor that served as greater proof than anything else that Schwartz and his battalion were fighting hard for the sake of the Empire's triumph. By drawing attention to the quantity or outstanding strength of his forces, he could then play his trump card in key areas that had become thin on the ground. If successfully implemented, Palladio Manesque's plan would have shattered the city's defensive measures and certainly would have been the decisive factor in the outcome of the siege. However, that was only if things had been successfully fitted together. Serena, when deploying the undead, the first thing to think about is tactics that will take advantage of their characteristics. It is inevitable that they will try to cross Mount Gildray in a way that makes them willing to die. Otto, with that in mind, when a wall that cannot be pushed through by sheer force is presented, it is natural to want to play your cards when the sky is empty. Serena, however, I was not expecting it to turn out this way. The Special Forces had been deployed to intercept the undead assault force that had targeted the city from the sky, and the command post nodded in agreement as the attack was prevented, which would have been a winning strategy from their opponent's point of view. As stated previously, it was an appropriate strategy for the undead to use. However, in terms of taking advantage of the unfortunate situation, it was a strategy that was too straightforward and orthodox. Direct attacks were standard methods and were effective when they worked, but they could easily be countered. Serena, according to what I've heard, his death during the imperial selection ceremony was also due to his excessive focus on the right way of attack. For better or worse, the time of the undead has stood still. Serena, who had sent out her own flying dragon squadron to destroy the undead flying dragon riders that had appeared in the sky, described their opponent as having failed to read her plan. It was true that Palladio Manesque was considered to be the opposing commander, and his name was mentioned as a target to be on the lookout for, but that was if he were to assist others by taking advantage of his evil eye tribe characteristics. In fact, Lamia Godwin's raid on the coupled dragon carriages had nearly destroyed the Empire because of Palladio's assistance. However, it was a silver lining amidst misfortune that the opposing party remained unaware of how to utilize their abilities to the fullest extent. Serena, it seems as if His Excellency Palladio is saying that you can never lose a bet if you can see your opponent's hand. Otto, normally, if you could see your opponent's hand, you would have a significant advantage. Serena, really? I could make a bet with you on the same terms. The only thing is, if you play with me, your family will be in danger. Otto, so this is why they call it the Wallachian way. Serena, being greedy for victory is a virtue. You're the same as I am, aren't you? Otto's face was truly bitter at the look in Serena's eyes, as if to suggest he had bad character. At any rate, it could be said that in terms of quality of the command post, they had surpassed their opponent. Having destroyed their winning strategy, the enemy would have no choice but to take the next step, and that was, Serena, he's playing his best trump card. The continuous deployment of forces is the flower of a losing battle. Kru'uua, raising a thunderous roar that shattered the sky, a three-headed dragon clad in black scales soared, flapping its wings as it flew over the hosts of undead, not even flinching as its whole body was showered in a hail of countless arrows. The jet-black blight dragon of foregone mind once again appeared in the skies of the Empire. Once slain by the hand of the admirer, the imposing three-headed Velgrain was a threat incomparable to any of the other undead, and was undoubtedly the trump card of the undead army. Given the failure of the surprise attack from over Mount Gildray, the commanding officer was correct in their judgment that they would be overpowered if they did not immediately strive to recover. However, as before, that did not emerge in the realm of a frontal attack. Along with a courageous voice, bulging thorns reached out to the sky from the city walls, furiously approaching the blight dragon of outstretched wings. It was the onslaught of Kafma Irelux. Kafma's suppressive power, capable of single-handedly upholding the warfront filled with undead as far as the eye could see, entangled Velgrain's entire body, its eyes not in its normal state, binding its wings before they could be torn apart. Of course, it was only a matter of time before the thorns would be torn to shreds by the dragon's physical strength. Kafma, but, my duty is this 1 second. Veins bulging all over his body in a mottled pattern, blood spilled from Kafma's nose as he spoke sharply to Velgrain in the skies above with a fierce expression, twisting its three heads as if it was angered by the proclamation of that diminutive presence. The blight dragon roared. A dragon's roar made all life shrink in fear. However, there were no cowards on this battlefield who would cower before the blight dragon's war cries. Al-Clauseria. Ensnared by thorns, Velgrain had ceased its movements mid-air. Aiming for one of the blight dragon's writing heads, an aurora of rainbow ran diagonally across the sky. It vibrantly seized Velgrain's right head, blowing it away from the base. It was a graceful, magnificent, and dazzling stroke of magic unleashed by the finest. Take aim. Next, the eyes of one of the remaining heads of the blight dragon was pierced by an arrow of divine speed. It was a small target when compared to the large build of the blight dragon, but the chieftain of the people of Shudrak had magnificently shot through it, and then sharply called out to the two by her side. Among the two who were called upon, one aligned the aim by eye measurement, and the other used her entire body to draw a huge bow that would have taken 10 regular people to pull. Let it have it. Take it down. The two of them combined their efforts to wield the powerful bow, and with a loud sound akin to a star being pierced, they landed a direct hit on the blinded head of the blight dragon, blasting everything above the jaw completely away, and reducing the three-headed turned two-headed even further into the one-headed. Velgrain, Kru'uua. On top of that, having lost both its left and right heads, Velgrain looked up to the sky as it generated tremendous heat within its large black body. The breath of destruction, so synonymous with dragons themselves, was turned towards the fortified city below. At that moment, the eyes of the crazed blight dragon were met by the eyes of someone watching it from inside the great fortress that it was supposed to capture. As that someone stood by that window, they directed their hand towards the blight dragon as it tore off the thorns within the skies. El Fula. If an objective could be accomplished with minimal toil, neither flashy magic nor outlandish monstrous strength were necessary. With precision that could serve as an example for all such things, the blight dragon's final remaining head was cut off by a blade of wind possessing an unrelenting sharpness. Velgrain. Each of its three heads lopped off, the blight dragon falleth. That was the pathetic defeat of the three-headed Velgrain, intended to be the trump card played by the undead forces. Palladio, impossible, 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 impossible. His body trembling all over, while scratching at his hair, Palladio could not accept the defeat of Velgrain which he had just witnessed occur through his evil eye. Things that should have been impossible continued to occur one after another. Because of that, Palladio fell from what was an overwhelmingly advantageous position, and with his pride wounded as the one who ought to have been leisurely waging the warfare of a true emperor, he tasted humiliation. Palladio, how? How have they seen through all of mine plans? The surprise tactic of having the undead flying dragon riders carry a dragon ship and cross over the mountain was perfect. He was not certain if that had been anticipated, or if it had been preserved fighting assets that immediately reacted to it, but the surprise tactic had been thwarted. Only, that was something neither unpleasant nor fatal. Rather, it ought not have been. Palladio, what even is the blight dragon, the three-headed? The three-headed Velgrain had immediately been sent out as a harbinger of despair in the past. It had exerted tyranny in the accursed neighboring nation, the kingdom of Lagunica, the resurrected fearsome blight dragon. If that dragon of foregone mind displayed its true worth, dominance through means of might and fear would have been accomplished. To think that the mighty Velgrain would be subjugated in such a manner, with its three heads lopped off. Palladio, why are the lot of you all so asinine? Why be you unable to fulfill the duties expected of mine limbs? The fallen blight dragon, the failed ambush corps, the swarms of undead still having trouble conquering the first wall, each of them had failed to provide utility to Palladio, a cluster of fools who only continued to drag down on his legs. When he took a moment to think about it, Vincent, Prisca, and Lamia all had competent servants in their service. In other words, the difference between Palladio, Vincent, and the rest came down to whether they were blessed with servants or not. They had nothing to do with the strength of the person in question, and were naught more than external decorations. Flaunting that, they were a shameless bunch unworthy of being a part of the imperial family attempting to outrival Palladio. Palladio, the emperor of the Briar's solitary nature, is the unmistakable true desire of Wallachian emperor. I shall never stoop to the methods of you cowardly lot. Even in the past imperial selection ceremony, Vincent avoided the stratagem that Palladio had formulated, and he had outsmarted Palladio, snatching victory through such means. The same thing was happening again. Palladio could not overlook such an outrageous act. Palladio, anybody, offer up a suggestion. As of now, I shall enact anything. While burning with humiliation, Palladio loudly called out to the undead encampment. In truth, Palladio had wished to persist as a solitary emperor who asked not for the likes of others' opinions. But, the opponent had taken advantage of Palladio's haughtiness, wielding a spear of malice. In that case, Palladio had no choice but to display the might of the emperor through severity. Palladio, is anyone there? Raise your voice. Or else, ? Well then, with your permission. Turning his head, Palladio looked over the personnel of poor complexion, and a single person raised their voice. At a glance, that was a slender figure slowly walking through the crowd of undead, witnessing the aura that was peculiarly different among the other undead. Palladio narrowed his three eyes. Their appearance clearly set them apart from mediocrity. The only thing remaining was whether their abilities would match that impression or not. Palladio, what are you capable of doing? ? That is right. First of all, how about I show you? Saying thus, the white-haired woman standing before Palladio smiled, and held her hand up towards the sky, and then, ? Anna, when the three heads of the three-headed blight dragon, whose appearance was anticipated, were severed in the sky above the city, and its colossal black frame was reduced to dust as it crashed down from above, Anastasia felt a sense of relief in her heart. Although it had been anticipated, the fact that the opponent was a heavy hitter remained unchanged. Even with appropriate preparations, there lingered the ever-present possibility of the enemy surpassing or outflanking them. Having avoided such a scenario, she felt the relief of a powerful foe having been thwarted. However, the solace Anastasia felt was torn to pieces by the voice of Echidna at her neck. Anastasia, having known each other for a decade, the spirit Echidna usually remained motionless, masquerading as Anastasia's scarf, bouncing up on her shoulder. She stared with black eyes up at the sky above the great fortress, tracing the gaze of Echidna. Anastasia's pale turquoise eyes widened. "Anastasia, are those stars?" Her murmured words rang uncertain, a manifestation of her lack of confidence. At the very least, one could say that it was a sight Anastasia had never seen in her lifetime, a scenery she could have never even imagined. Higher than the flock of undead flying dragons that crossed over Mount Gildray, higher than the three-headed blight dragon which had ascended even further beyond that, lights were cascading down upon the city from above. The stars were falling next to Anastasia as she marveled at the extraordinary sight. As Otto and Bastetts were left speechless, Serena, witnessing the same scene, contorted the sword scar on her face into a smile. "Serena, the atmosphere has changed. Win or lose, the conclusion draws near." Palladio, ha ha, ha 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 ha. "Excellent, yes, this is it. The sight I had coveted." Witnessing the sight unfolding in the sky of the battlefield, Palladio broke into ecstatic dance. The defenses of the fortified city, known for their solidity, would amount to naught once the cascading light reached the ground. The resistance of those puny imbeciles would equate to rubbish before the radiance of stars. "Palladio, you have done well to appear before me. I shall enlist you among mine vassals. By what name shall I address you?" Joy shimmering in his three golden eyes, Palladio posed the question to the white-haired woman, who had given rise to that sight. Once again catching a frontward glimpse of the woman, who had turned to face him following his query, Palladio caught his breath. Beautiful white hair and refined features capable of sending shivers down one's spine, but above all else, her face and eyes were bereft of the physical traits that could identify her as an undead. It was an appearance that could cause one to mistake her as a living being. But then, why would she contribute to his side? When Palladio questioned this, the woman deeply bent her hips and bowed, and then she returned an answer to his question. An introduction as to just who exactly she was. What name would be correct to use is a bit of a complicated affair. So for the time being, I suppose you can just call me the Witch of Greed, so she declared.